So what if the United States, Israel, and Iran actually went to war? It's a terrifying thought, but it's also a scenario that's terrifyingly plausible. A conflict like this wouldn't just pop up out of the blue. Its roots run deep, really deep, stretching back decades and weaving this incredibly complex story of ideology, ambition, and pure animosity.
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why? To get to the bottom of it, we have to do something a little unconventional. We have to start at the end. Or maybe it's better to say the beginning of the end.
So just picture this. It's February 28th, 2026, 9:45 in the morning. All of a sudden, Israeli missiles slam into the Ayatollah's compound in Tehran, killing the supreme leader. At almost the exact same time, American strikes are wiping out missile sites and naval bases across the country. In a flash, these three powers are at war. So how on earth did we get here?
To figure that out, we've got to rewind the clock. We're going to trace the story through four really crucial chapters. First, the ideological groundwork laid way back in 1979. Then we'll get into the high-stakes nuclear standoff. After that, we'll see how a long-running shadow war finally bursts into the open. And then finally, we'll look at the last frantic steps toward an all-out war.
All right, let's start at the beginning. Because to really get a handle on this deep-seated hostility, you have to go all the way back to 1979. This is the year the ideological seeds for this future war were first planted.
You know, this right here, this is the moment where absolutely everything changed. Before 1979, Iran and the United States were actually close allies. But the Islamic Revolution didn't just swap out one government for another. It completely and violently reset Iran's entire relationship with the West.
And listen to this quote from the revolution's leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. This wasn't just some fiery political rhetoric. This right here hardwired a deep, fundamental animosity for America and Israel directly into the DNA of the new regime.
And that ideology didn't stay as just words for long. It turned into action fast. The Iran hostage crisis. 444 agonizing days that American diplomats were held captive. This became the single event that just shattered any hope of normal relations. It cemented decades of mistrust and basically severed diplomatic ties for good. So, with that foundation of pure ideological hatred firmly in place, the conflict started to take on a new, and frankly, a terrifying new dimension, the idea of a nuclear-armed Iran. And this issue would go on to dominate the global stage for the next 20 years.
Iran's nuclear program has been this long story of secrets, intense diplomacy, and, well, eventual collapse. It was first revealed to the world back in 2002, and that kicked off years of tension. It all led up to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. You've probably heard of it as the JCPOA. But that huge diplomatic achievement, well, it would completely fall apart just a few years later.
The U.S. pulling out of the deal was the critical turning point. Almost immediately, Iran responded by ramping up its uranium enrichment to high levels, moving closer and closer to being able to build a nuclear weapon. For both Israel and the United States, this was a red line, a line that absolutely could not be crossed.
So this political and nuclear standoff, it was about to boil over into open violent conflict. For decades, Israel and Iran had been fighting this so-called shadow war, using proxy groups all over the region. Well, that shadow war was about to explode right out into the open.
After the horrific October 7th attack by the Iranian-backed group Hamas, Israel's strategy became brutally simple and crystal clear. It was this methodical, three-step plan. First, take out Iran's key proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah. Then, once they're out of the way, turn to the source of the problem, Iran itself.
And you know what? This strategy was brutally effective. After a 2-year campaign, Hamas was basically busted down from a military force to just a guerrilla group. Hezbollah was crippled by these incredibly daring operations, including one nicknamed Operation Grim Beeper, involving exploding pagers and the assassination of its powerful leader. So with its two biggest proxy shields just gone, Iran was suddenly left completely exposed.
And this was the moment it all changed. No more proxies, no more fighting in the shadows. With this one statement, the war became direct. It was now state versus state. Israel and Iran were openly striking each other's territory.
This led to a massive, but pretty short,
conflict in June of 2025 that really felt like a dress rehearsal for the main event. Iran launched this huge barrage. We're talking 500 missiles, 1,000 drones. The US and Israel hit back hard, targeting Iran's nuclear program directly, even using these massive 30,000-pound bombs to hit its most protected sites. They called a ceasefire, but everybody knew it was just a pause.
Okay, so now we get to the final rapid-fire sequence of events, the last 90 days, where all diplomacy failed and a full-scale war became basically inevitable. I mean, just look at this number. It's staggering. As these huge mass protests against the regime swept through Iran, the government responded with just unthinkable brutality. In one 48-hour period, security forces killed an estimated 30,000 of their own people. For the rest of the world, especially the US, this massacre was the point of no return. And from that moment on, the countdown to war just picked up speed like crazy. It started with a public promise of help from the US president. Then came a really crucial meeting at the White House where you have to assume war planning began in earnest. That was followed by a massive deployment of US military ships and planes to the region. And then the final, unmistakable sign, the evacuation of diplomats. The path to war was set.
And these words, spoken right before the conflict kicked off, they pretty much signaled that the decision had been made. The time for talking was officially over.
And that brings us full circle, right back to that morning when two massive military campaigns, Israel's Operation Roaring Lion and America's Operation Epic Fury, were launched at the same time. And now we know the decades of history that led right to this moment.
The intensity in those first few hours was just immense. The US and Israel launched a combined 900 strikes, and Iran responded by unleashing over 400 missiles and hundreds of drones, and they were targeting 9 different countries. The war began with this absolutely massive, violent exchange of firepower, and this conflict didn't stay contained. Not at all. It immediately spilled across the entire Middle East, with Iranian counterattacks hitting U.S. military headquarters in places like Bahrain. The whole region was instantly engulfed in flames.
Which brings us to today, in our scenario. Iran is showing no signs of surrender, and the bombing campaigns aren't letting up. A lot is still uncertain, but one thing is absolutely clear. The Middle East that comes out of this conflict will be nothing like the one that went into it. So the final question we're left with is, what will it become?